Hey guys, so I was not sure what I wanted to do for content this Monday because I actually don't have an arc that's like due right now, which is been a while since that happened. And it's been the start of a new school year, and so I've been teaching and doing some PhD stuff, so I haven't really been reading a ton. But as always, what I have been doing is listening to a ton of podcasts. Now, the last time I did a podcast recommendation video, they were all true crime based, and I did that around a life update, and you guys seem to really enjoy that. I do listen to a lot of true crime podcasts, and I guess kind of sort of the things that we're going to talk about today are true crime adjacent. But instead today, I want to focus on some of the best scam podcasts that I have been listening to lately. Now, going back even further in time to a life update that I also did with podcast recommendations, these were all just random, and one of the podcasts that I had been listening to at the time was Scamanda. I feel like this has been a podcast that's been like really big, since it was also like a really popular podcast, but also Hulu made it into a documentary, which I have also watched and have feelings about, and maybe eventually I'll be able to like listen and watch in a more concentrated time and do like a pod to doc review, but now is not that time. What I wanted to do is, if you were like me and you really like Scamanda and you wanted to find something else to really enjoy but weren't sure what, these are some of my recommendations. I also wanted to do this video because it is slightly inspired by the fact that Charlie Webster, who is the host of Scamanda, has a new podcast that is being released with weekly episodes right now. This is also one that I'm definitely going to recommend, even though I don't quite know how the storytelling is going to end yet, since it is ongoing. But if you haven't checked it out yet, it is called Unicorn Girl, and it is from Apple TV and 7 Hills. I do not have an Apple Podcast account. I'm listening to it on Spotify, where you can also get it. So I imagine it's anywhere else that you also get your podcasts. Unicorn Girl is the story of Candace. Candace has an online presence that suggests that she is a perfect mother. She is a human trafficking advocate. She starts a nonprofit that makes claims that it's going to go rescue people when the US left Afghanistan. It's a whole thing, but of course, nothing is as it seems, but also some of it is wildly true. I don't know. Every episode has just escalated so much, so fast, and I don't know where it's going, but it is absolutely a wild ride that it's also almost weirder when it's true. The rest of the podcast series that I'm going to mention are finished, or at the very least they have one season behind them, and I'm saying that for a reason, because of one of the ones that I have to tell you about that I have not seen nearly enough people talking about, and that is Elizabeth from CC Suarez and Sherilyn Dale. Now, I don't know if you remember this, because you may have seen a couple of years ago, there was this viral video about a woman who was like baking her own cupcake to celebrate her birthday with her kids because she was a single mom and she wanted to make good memories with them, but she's like crying and she makes a cupcake. It was like a whole thing on the internet. That video went viral, and then her ex-husband made kind of like a follow-up video where he was like, yeah, this whole story that she's telling in this video isn't true, and kind of like exposed her, and it became like a whole thing. And I actually did see that first video, even though I am not like chronically online. The folks who made this podcast originally were just going to feature like the story around that one video for a podcast that they also host, which is about like, you know, drama on the internet essentially. And then they dug into this woman whose name is Elizabeth and realized that this one internet lie was but the tip of an iceberg that spans like, there is money scamming, there was a fake cancer situation, it is very much like Scamanda plus like financial crimes, you know, dating other men behind her husband's back, like pretending potentially to be a lawyer that is communicating with her husband about a legal issue, and like literally making enough fake emails and a fake website to like impersonate being people on the internet. This story is crazy. And this one did finish its like Elizabeth arc, but in finding out all of these stories about Elizabeth, they actually kind of cottoned on to the story of another potential fraudster and scam artist who was like involved themselves in this story. And so at the end of this like first season of Elizabeth, they have said that they're going to follow up on that as well. I don't know if they'll make it like the second season of this or if they'll make a whole new podcast. But yeah, this is a story that just kept going in like levels you probably couldn't imagine. So definitely worth it. I am going to mention a couple that came out a couple of years ago, but in case you missed them, because I certainly did when they first came out, I raced my way through Believable, the Coco Berthman story from Dear Media. This is the story of Coco Berthman. She is a European immigrant who comes to the United States and has, like, first of all, a conversion to Mormonism, and also starts telling stories about how she was a human trafficking victim and who was human trafficked by her mother. And so she has this really wild story about how, you know, her mother would basically sell her to men and move her around. And she came to the United States to escape from her mom. Now, as people begin to unpick this story, they realize that a lot of what she's saying probably isn't true, and that there is maybe some truth at the bottom of the story, and the people behind the podcast really, really do their utmost, including talking to her mom and a stepfather who figures really, really closely into the story, to really try and parse the truth from the lie, because as they say, every time they assume that a story that Coco tells is entirely fiction, they find out that there is maybe more of a kernel of truth at the bottom of it. This podcast also goes beyond kind of like just Coco's story and also talks about the world of human trafficking activists and what that world looks like. In particular, talking about the fact that Coco ends up being really valorized and like very present for her story, but while the same media that like brings her out to speak and all this stuff, her as like a blue-eyed like white woman from Europe is ignoring some of these human trafficking victims who are now also advocates who are of color and speaking out, and they talk to them as well and the difference in their experience. She's also just dealing with like the media. So it's a story that at one hand you watch them doing incredible investigative journalism as the series goes along, but it also kind of expands past just Coco's story and kind of examines the media landscape in which they're telling the story. So it was really interesting. And again, that series is done, so you can go binge listen the whole thing now. One of the podcasts that just blew my mind completely open is the latest season from The Con from CBC and the BBC. The Con, I think at one point did a series called Love Janessa, which was really popular, and I think it maybe even ended up getting a docuseries made out of it. I am unclear. I've actually not listened to Love Janessa. I have listened to the latest season of The Con, which is called Caitlin's Baby. Caitlin's Baby is the story of a woman named Caitlin, and all of the doulas she has scammed. Because Caitlin's scam is to pretend to be pregnant and then basically hijack the lives of these doulas that she reaches out to, you know, calling them, telling them that she needs their help, having some really, really aggressively violent things that either happen to her on the phone or in between phone calls, and really just like monopolizing these women and their desire to really help Caitlin through what they are assuming is an incredibly difficult pregnancy. And of course, during COVID times, when this really starts happening, it is all over the phone. But as the world moves out of COVID times, it becomes something where Caitlyn is like trapping these women in hotel rooms to give her attention, essentially. What's really wild about this story is that unlike some of these other scams where, you know, there's financial gain, quite often mostly financial gain, certainly in things like Scamanda, Elizabeth, all these other ones, there is like an element of attention, but there is also more material interest in them. And there is really no material interest in Caitlyn's scamming of the doulas. It literally just is to monopolize their attention and get their care and concern, to the point where, you know, she runs these women ragged. She has run women out of the profession. And it was also a very, very complicated case because there wasn't really this financial component to even see justice. And yeah, this one was one where I was just like, what? It's so difficult to wrap your head around. The podcast itself is really well done, and so I've certainly never listened to anything like it. And so if you missed this one, go back for it because your brain will explode. I also want to recommend a couple of scam podcasts that you may be interested in if you do not want to necessarily invest in something that is multiple episodes. Maybe you want something a little bit more episodic. Unfortunately, this next one is done and it doesn't look like they are releasing any more episodes. But after, again, this is a little bit older now, found Scam Town from Apple TV and Fun Meter. This one was a scam podcast that covers a different scam every single episode. I think there's like 7 or 8 of them. But like things like someone who was running a knitting company that hand dyed yarn and then was potentially scamming people and then faked her own death. Like, I'm a knitter and I didn't even know that happened in the knitting community. So I really appreciated how I felt like this series in particular covered some maybe quieter stories, smaller stories that still will make your brain explode, but maybe aren't, you know, like the ones that will break the internet, which was really, really nice. I did have some issues with the podcast production itself, but I still want to recommend it because of the different types and unique types of scams that they used in this series. And finally, I cannot let a scam podcast recommendation video go by without recommending Scamfluencers. This is a podcast from Wondery, and this is still very much ongoing. There is, I think, over 100, 200 episodes. I'm still not caught up because I have been having so much fun with this series that I just went all the way back to the beginning, and I've been listening like going forward. It is 2 wonderful women who are chatting about these different cons and scams and having a lot of fun talking to each other while they do it. It is really just like sitting down and listening to a couple of your very bubbly friends tell you a really wild story. And again, this is one where it's episodic, and so sometimes they do use like 2 episodes to cover a story if there is that much meat to it, but a lot of times they're just 1 episode, and it's just a lot of fun. And so yeah, this is one that is ongoing. You can join in and start from the beginning to do some binge listening like I have been. I wouldn't say that a lot of times the scam podcasts are fun. They're, again, normally just make your brain explode when you try to figure out why and how people would do these things. But Scamfluencers is a really good listen if you need something maybe on the lighter side, but still want to cover this topic. So those are just a few of the recommendations that I really wanted to hand off to you guys. If you have recommendations of podcasts you think that I should listen to based on these, please leave them down below in the comments. I am always looking for new ones. And will I be back next week with the arc that I'm supposed to read? We don't know. So we'll find out together next Monday. I'll see you then. Bye.